September 17, 2025, at exactly 10 a.m., an extremely difficult but ultimately successful operation began near the village of Kucheriv Yar in Donetsk region. Until then, the area had been under occupation by Russian forces. The enemy had concentrated a significant number of tanks and other armored vehicles there, and the village perimeter was constantly monitored by Russian infantry pickets and reconnaissance drones. For the occupiers, direct combat here did not seem likely. The fighting had died down, and this sector was considered a staging point for further attacks. The Russians believed it well protected. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces were already drawing up a lightning plan to surprise the enemy and carry out a brilliant operation right under their noses. Ukrainian units holding the line on this axis were discreetly regrouped and moved into positions around Kucheriv Yar into three key settlements: Kudazivka, Kuruzke, and Sofiivka. Ukrainian drone operators launched reconnaissance UAVs into the sky and tracked every enemy movement around the clock. They anticipated vehicle and infantry movements in advance. Thanks to this, all targets were identified in detail: the locations of tanks and armored vehicles, infantry patrol routes, firing points, and the enemy's command posts. The operation was planned to begin instantly, as soon as everything was ready. To rapidly destroy concentrations of Russian tanks, Command decided to employ newly arrived American M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles and to carry assault infantry units on M113 APCs. The Tau anti-tank missiles mounted on the Bradleys are capable of engaging armor at long range before the enemy even realizes what is happening. The basic hull construction of the M2 Bradley is an aluminum alloy with additional steel appliques in vulnerable areas. The sky above the potential battlefield was already controlled by Ukrainian kamikaze drones. Several of these loitering munitions circled high, remaining unnoticed and waiting for the command to strike designated targets in the first seconds of the assault. At the same time, electronic warfare units were ready to jam enemy communications, depriving the occupiers of the ability to coordinate their defense. At first glance, storming a well-fortified enemy camp deep in the rear seemed madness. Yet it is often on the thin line between desperation and heroism that incredible victories are born. At exactly 10 o'clock, Ukrainian forces struck simultaneously. Several bright rocket trails cut the morning sky at once. The Bradleys launched their first salvo of guided missiles at the enemy's key tanks. Within seconds, 3 Russian vehicles were transformed into burning heaps of metal. Powerful warheads pierced their armor and detonated the stored ammunition inside. At the same time, Ukrainian kamikaze drones began striking swiftly from the sky. One UAV slammed directly into the antenna of an enemy command and control vehicle, knocking out communications equipment and disorienting the commanders. Another drone struck a fuel tanker at the edge of the camp. A massive explosion sent a black mushroom cloud into the air. Burning fuel spread around, igniting nearby vehicles. In the very first seconds of the assault, the Russian camp descended into chaos. The occupiers had no time to recover before Ukrainian armored vehicles surged forward. Under the cover of explosions, 3 assault groups on Bradleys stormed into Kucheriv Yar almost simultaneously from different directions, from Kudazivka, Ruska, and Sofiivka, encircling the village in a semicircle. The Bradleys opened fire on the move with their 25mm autocannons, showering nearby trenches and buildings with a barrage of shells. Russian sentries on the perimeter were neutralized by the first bursts. Stunned by the sudden assault, enemy soldiers scrambled in confusion, trying to organize a defense. Tank crews hastily climbed into their T-72s, while infantrymen dove into trenches and grabbed their rifles. But the coordinated strike from multiple directions paralyzed their actions. The enemy had no idea where the next blow would come from. Some Russian tanks nevertheless managed to start their engines. One of them, marked with a white Z on its armor, swung its turret and fired blindly. The shell whistled past the target and exploded in a field behind the Ukrainian fighters, throwing up a fountain of soil. At that very moment, a Ukrainian crew launched a missile from a Javelin portable system. The bright projectile soared upward and then struck directly from above into the roof of the enemy tank. In a split second, the T-92 was ripped apart from within. Its turret was blown sky high, and flames engulfed the hull. Having destroyed the vehicle, the Ukrainian troops pressed on with their assault, maintaining their momentum. On the opposite flank, a group of Russian anti-tank missile operators tried to ambush a Bradley. From the bushes came a faint flash, and an anti-tank rocket streaked toward the Ukrainian armored vehicle. Yet this threat was neutralized instantly. Before the missile could even reach its target, a Ukrainian kamikaze drone dove from the sky. It slammed directly into the trench where the enemy ATGM crew was hiding. The explosion obliterated the operators at the very moment they pressed the launch button. The orphaned Russian missile lost guidance and exploded harmlessly off to the side, hitting no one. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the village, an enemy mortar opened up. The Russians desperately tried to blanket the Ukrainian assault groups with indirect fire. Muffled thumps echoed, and black clouds of explosions blossomed across the field. But stripped of coordination, the occupiers fired blindly. Their shells landed chaotically, failing to harm the attackers and sometimes detonating right among their own positions. A Ukrainian reconnaissance drone quickly pinpointed the mortar's location by tracking the muzzle flashes. The coordinates were immediately relayed to the nearest Bradley. The vehicle swung its turret and fired a guided missile straight at the site. The explosion engulfed the mortar crew. When the smoke cleared, a large crater scarred the ground where the enemy weapon had stood, littered with fragments. In less than half an hour, the battle was over. Kucheriv Yar was cleared of enemy forces. Over the village, the blue and yellow flag was raised, fastened by Ukrainian soldiers to a power line pole scarred with shrapnel. The remains of more than 10 Russian tanks and trucks still smoldered at the site. Enemy trenches were strewn with abandoned rifles, shattered helmets, and scattered ammunition crates. The surviving Russian soldiers either fled across the fields or surrendered and were taken captive. Ukrainian losses in this high-risk assault proved minimal. Only one armored vehicle sustained minor track damage from a nearby blast, yet its crew remained in the fight. The soldiers kept battling side by side with the infantry. The lightning assault and the element of surprise left the enemy with no chance to inflict serious harm on the assault groups.